I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and here today with me is Kerry Stevenson, host of Making Money Matter and founder of the Australian Gold Conference. She also is, of course, an investor. Really good to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Charlotte, it's great to be on your program and nice to see you again. The last time I saw you, we were over at the Rick Raw conference in Florida. That was great fun.
It was a lot of fun, and it's really good to be catching up with you again after that. I was thinking it's clearly it's not our first time talking. We know each other, but just for those who may not be familiar, since you haven't been on this channel before, if you could start by giving just a brief introduction to who you are, how you got involved in the resource sector, hosting conferences, and what you do now.
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, I do host a YouTube channel called Making Money Matter, where we do talk to, like yourself, we talk to a lot of resource companies or companies that investors might be interested in hearing from, but also looking at the macro picture as well. Why do I do that? Because I've got a really curious mind. And as you said at the start, I am an investor. So for me, I'm always looking for what's happening out there. And I thought, well, why not share it with other people as well? So I do that. But how did I get involved in resources? Well, I came back from Europe in 2003 and I couldn't get a job. And it was actually my ex-husband that said to me, why don't you start a mining conference? And my first response to that was, I have no clue about mining, except that's a very large diamond. And he said, you're smart, learn. So I did. And what I realized, Charlotte, was that here in Australia, if it's not agriculture, it's mining. Mining is what built and gave Australia its economic wealth. But many people in Australia have no clue, as I did at the time back in 2003. So I started to learn. So it's been 20 years now. I find the industry fascinating. And as I said just a moment ago, everything is mined or grown. So I'm an investor, I host a podcast, and I'm the founder of the Australian Gold Conference. It's the only conference dedicated to precious metals in Australia.
Thank you for going through that. I think it's always great to get the origin story, and that's a really interesting background. So where I want to start now is, so I know that you are in touch with investors, you're speaking to companies all the time, you've been doing some recent traveling. So I was hoping you could give me an idea of how investor sentiment is looking right now in Australia. I know over here in Canada and North America, people are feeling pretty downtrodden as they look at the mining sector. So what are you seeing?
I'm seeing a bit of struggle street happening at the moment, Charlotte, in terms of cost of living in Australia is going through the roof. We all know the inflation story. It's here. It's sticky. It's not going away. So there's I guess, a little bit of pressure on people as to the fear factor, worrying about prices and where they're going. And that's not just general day-to-day living. It's the fuel prices, et cetera, et cetera. From an investor point of view, I'm finding that people are almost confused and not looking at the fundamentals of companies, be that in resources or biotech. It doesn't matter which sector. People are, it's almost like they're going into a gambling mentality rather than looking at the fundamentals of a company, because some companies with great projects, their share price is tanked or really not, in my opinion, showing true value. And then you have others that are running through the roof. And I'm looking at thinking, is that day traders just pushing that price up back to, remember when that silver squeeze and the Reddit, what was it, GameStop? Remember the GameStop story? And I wonder whether some of that has something to do with it. And so the fundamentals are out the window to a certain extent during this time. And speculation is the name of the game, along with a lot of people sitting on the sidelines, sitting in cash, thinking there's no real direction to this market at the moment, so they do nothing.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about this before we turned the camera on, and I think it is really easy for people to get stuck in that, looking out there, it looks confusing, things aren't moving as maybe they should. Maybe it's easier to stay put and stay in the sidelines. So maybe this is a good transition to ask you what you're doing with your money right now, where you see opportunity and how to take action.
Oh, that's a very good question, Charlotte. What am I doing with my money right now? Well, while everyone is, gold, I'm wearing my gold jacket. I am known as that gold lady. I'm looking at gold, and if gold and gold equity is very unloved at the moment. People are looking at tech stocks. They're looking at, they're even looking at putting cash in the bank and getting 5% return. And as Warren Buffett once famously said, owning gold is just a big hole in the ground looking at some metal that does nothing, doesn't give you a return. Well, my opinion is that over time, gold does what it always does, which is it keeps your purchasing power. And while governments around the world are printing money like drunken sailors and spending like drunken sailors, I look at gold as my safe haven. So what am I doing? I'm not going all in. I'm not saying, I'm selling my house and my child to purchase gold, but I'm certainly diversifying so that I'm looking at different ways, so that if, for example, there's something in the share market starts to move, I've got exposure to that. I've got exposure to physical gold and physical silver, as well as gold equity. So for me, it's all about diversification, because my view is that if you keep printing like drunken sailors, then hard assets is something that you really strongly need to look at. And by the way, as you know, Charlotte, this is not financial advice. This is just what I'm doing. And I always say to people, do your own research and don't put a dime of your hard-earned wealth into this market without doing research. And I think, Charlotte, half the issue is that people use social media to tell them what to do. They're listening to people on Facebook, and I'm like, hey, they don't read reports. They don't understand quarterly reports. They don't call the company. They don't look at who's running the company and where they come from. Do your research.
Yeah, I think it's so important to do your research, do your due diligence, take ownership of what you're doing with your money in that way. And, of course, everybody should take a look at what they want to do with their money. They don't have to listen to you. They should look at a diverse array. But so you're looking at hard assets. You want to diversify. Maybe we can look on the company side as well and look at when you are evaluating companies in the resource sector. What are you looking for?
Well, the first thing I look for is who's behind the company, who's running the company, what's their track record, are they coming from outside the resources industry, and they've just gone in and thought, well, I can probably make some money by raising $5 million, $10 million from unsuspecting investors, and it doesn't really matter whether I get this project off the ground. So the first thing that I always say to people is, who's running the company? So people first, project second, jurisdiction third. So there are certain areas where, I've had someone say to me, well, we've got this project in, for example, and I'm not saying that this for everybody, but for me, Papua New Guinea is a difficult jurisdiction. Some parts of Africa are a difficult jurisdiction. So that does play into the way I look at it. But as I said right at the start, it's the people behind the projects that you've got to look at.
Yeah, I agree. That's so important. And, I want to go back and look at gold a little bit deeper. So you mentioned gold is so unloved right now. Certainly we can feel that, even though the price is historically high. And I actually, before this call, I was looking at the price of gold in Australian dollars, and it looks like it's reached new highs even. So where do you see us as being in the gold cycle right now?
In the gold cycle right now, I think that the shiny lithium sector is the one that everyone's looking at. And so they're looking at, we all know that we're going through this energy transition, and people are talking rare earths, which, by the way, are not rare. They're talking lithium. They're talking all this sort of green tech, areas. And they've forgotten, again, goes back to what I said before, the fundamentals. Gold is money. In my opinion, everything else is credit and comes with that, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word, but the associated challenges with that. So for me, I like gold, but that's physical gold. When you look at gold equities and gold itself. Again, a lot of the ASX listed companies in gold, they're doing okay, but I would have thought they would do a lot better. There are a couple of standouts, and am I allowed to mention companies? Is that okay? But
Yes, if you would like to, definitely welcome.
well, Spartan Resources. Now, this is a fascinating one. It was formerly known as Gascoyne. Now, Gascoyne Resources over in Western Australia, great project. They had a plant, and they went into administration. So they were under some management. They didn't quite potentially understand what it is that they had on their hands. Enter Simon Lawson, formerly with Northern Star Resources. He understands different ways of looking at things, and he came in with a new set of eyes. Very, very smart guy. Now, what is he finding right now? He's finding extraordinarily high grades of gold at their Never Never deposit. And in fact, they came out this week with over 1,000 grams per ton of gold. Now, back in May, I think the share price was trading 11, 12 cents. I think they closed yesterday about 42. Have they got a lot further to go? Well, the managing director, Simon Lawson, as he says to me all the time, this is a business. I am here to make sure that we give value back to shareholders. That's what you want to hear. You want to hear that the person running the company understand that it's a business, looks at what they're doing and where they're going to find things, and not going at it in a scattergun approach. And as he said to me recently, he said, rather than me coming in and telling the guys that are there and know what they're doing, the geos, he looked at all of them and he said, well, where would you drill? And he said all of them just turned around and said, well, we drill right here. So he said, well, go do it. And guess what? They've got a discovery on their hands, and the company has a complete turnaround. There are others in the gold space. And there are others in the gold space, like, for example, Evolution Mining, great company, executive chairman Jake Klein, really good operator. But I think it was back in, it'd be 2020. Their share price was running at about $6, and today we're in about the $3 range. I would have thought that given the price of gold, over $3,000 Aussie, I think it's 1977 US, so it's a play on currencies at the moment, that would have a bit of a stronger share price, but that they do give a dividend. So you go from the really big guys like the Evolutions and the Northern Stars and the Regis, which are strong companies, producers, right down to the little guys. But, as you know, Charlotte, if they make a discovery, then it goes back to the Lassonde curve. That discovery moment is when that share price can really start to move.
Yeah, okay, that was really interesting. And it sounds like, when you're talking about which companies are seeing success right now in the gold sector, it sounds like it does go back to that strong management idea first that you were mentioning. So definitely good to follow. I wondered if there are any other trends that you're seeing in the gold sector right now that you think investors should pay attention to that might have bearing on, what people want to do with their money heading into 2024.
I always, it's what they want to do with their money. It's funny. This is just me. I call it, what do they want to do with their currency? Because I always say, gold is money, everything else is credit. What do you want to do with your currency? What's the currency going to be doing? Look, I don't know. I have a feeling that there's people turning around saying the US dollar is going to be stronger for longer. I suspect that's right. I don't believe that the US dollar is going to collapse anytime soon. There are people out there saying that that's what will happen, but I think the US dollar is a reserve currency. It might not be as strong in the future, but I do think that you've got to look at where you put your currency and how you're going to do it. Now, what do you do? Goes back to what I said right at the beginning. Not just gold. You've got to look at trends, and we all know, Charlotte, right now the trend is towards this zero carbon emission. What I'm seeing right now is zero carbon emission from a commodity sector and an energy sector, because we need more and more energy to transition, regardless of which way you look at it. this energy transition, this zero carbon world that people want us to live in, uranium. Uranium, in my opinion, is a commodity to really start to have a look at. And the highest grades of uranium in the world are the Athabasca Basin. So you've got a lot of companies out there, such as, from an Australian point of view, a lot of Aussies up in the Athabasca at the moment doing work. And the uranium price is, I think it's just about to hit $80 a pound. And it wasn't so long ago that it was $49.50. So clearly there's a little bit of a turnaround. That Athabasca Basin, high grades. You've got companies like Terra Uranium, 92E. There's a number of good Aussie companies up there. And then you've got Aussie companies working in Africa as well as Australia. Now, I suspect, I don't know, but I think there's going to come a time in the not too distant future where the Australian government will have to turn around and say, do you know what? For us to get to zero carbon emissions, as we keep saying we want to, we're going to have to start using nuclear energy. It's just a fact. And what do you need for nuclear energy? You need uranium.
Yeah, and it seems like so many governments around the world have come to that conclusion. So it does feel a little bit inevitable that that's going to be coming at some point in the future. And, uranium, our audience has a really strong interest in uranium. So I'm glad that you brought that up. One thing that I find really interesting, so I think you mentioned some companies that are kind of more on the exploration side. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. So how is that how you're approaching this sector? Because I know some people right now are saying, it's so small, there's so few players. We rather just go with the large companies.
I think that depends on your investing appetite. The explorers, there's always a lot more risk when it comes to exploration. Will those companies ever get into mining? Well, again, it comes back to people, doesn't it? And I look at somebody like John Borshoff, for example. His company, Deep Yellow Assets here in Australia, big believer in the uranium story. John's done it before. He'll do it again. So again, you go back to people. What are they doing? Have they done it before? But these are all in the exploration phase. The supply side in uranium is a real challenge. So I tend to agree with you, Charlotte, that if you want to stay safe and just go into those that are producing already, I think you'll do very well. But there's also, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I believe he's up, and I can't remember his name, Amir Adani, I think it is, that's got the uranium ETF. And I think if you want exposure to uranium, that's potentially a very clever thing to do as well. Down here in Australia, of course, we do have the Honeymoon mine, which is Boss Energy. They're looking really good, and their boss, Duncan Craig, when the uranium price was really unloved, he actually went out and bought yellowcake as a support for those that would need uranium. And as a shareholders did extremely well out of that strategy that he had back in the day when uranium was really not being looked at as it is today.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. Thanks for going through all that uranium information. I also want to ask you a little bit more about how to approach the lithium sector. So, of course, we know Australia is a major producer of lithium. So lots of companies over there in Australia that people could look at probably all areas of the food chain. Also, we're seeing Australians come over to Canada and pursue lithium a lot of the time over in Quebec, other areas. So I wonder how you're approaching the lithium sector, because I think lots of people want to hear about that.
How do I approach the lithium sector? I approach it with confusion. And I say that, Charlotte, because there's a great story, and I'll just go through it. There's a company called TG Metals. Now, TG, I love it, stands for the goat. TG Metals, the goat, the tethered goat. Now, they've got a greenstone project over Lake Johnston in Western Australia. When I saw one of the original founders of the company in, I think it was May or June here on the Gold Coast, he was talking about it. Now, they hadn't got their permits at that stage. This was back May, June of this year. Share price was running at about 8 cents. Permits come through, assays come back, world starts getting very excited about it. Stock closed at 92 cents yesterday. Now, admittedly, not that many shares on issue, kind of like a Canadian company, only about 50, I think it's 57 million shares on issue, of which approximately 50% of those are escrowed for a couple of years. So it doesn't take much to move that share price up to 92. But, again, buyer beware. If the next set of assay results come back and they're not what the market is expecting, then that share price could go from 92 to 20. So that's the massive changes that you can see. And then you look at other companies in the space, such as Ioneer, which is actually over in the US. They've got the lithium boron project at Rhyolite Ridge in Nevada. Great company, being run extremely well. The boron is going to help offset the cost of getting out the lithium, but their share price, which got to as high as, I think it was about in their 60s, is now languishing at 15 cents. So that shows me that discovery model, when people find a discovery and everyone gets overexcited, that's when that share price can really move. But then when they're in what we call the boring bit, the construction and the getting into mining, because look, nothing is absolutely certain in this world, Charlotte, but I'm pretty sure that Rhyolite Ridge will become a mine. But they're in the boring part of spending money, getting into construction. So the market doesn't like it. So how do I look at lithium? Skepticism and with hopeism.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm sure many investors feel the same way. For me, when I look at lithium, I often get overwhelmed because, we always talk about uranium as an opaque market, but lithium is the same, different types of prices. We have right now interesting supply-demand dynamics where we had previously such highs in the price that have now pulled back. But meanwhile, looking out further, of course, we have the very strong electric vehicle demand outlook. So any advice for navigating all these different nuances of the market?
Well, it's interesting. There's another company which I find fascinating because, again, going back to ESG, going back to zero carbon emissions, if you've got a project that is close to a manufacturing hub, that piques my interest. And so there's a company listed on the ASX called Pan Asia Metals. Now, where are they? They're in Thailand. A lot of people go, oh, it's Thailand, and they worry about that. And I say, well, and they also worry because it's lepidolite. Well, lepidolite has been, lithium from lepidolite has been produced in China for a very long time. There's nothing to be scared about. People just don't understand it. They understand brines, they understand spodumene, but they don't understand lepidolite. It's absolutely fine. The key with Pan Asia Metals is they're very close to a very large manufacturing hub, which is Thailand. A number of the cars, the electric vehicle cars that we see here in Australia, such as the Mercedes-Benz and others, are actually manufactured in Thailand. Now, Pan Asia Metals projects are not that very far away. And in fact, the other thing that I like about them, they're just 40 kilometers north of Phuket in Thailand. What a place to go. But that aside, they're in Thailand. They're close to manufacturing. So the cost of getting that supply to that manufacturing hub is going to be very key. But along with that, they're being very strategic in turning around and saying, well, we're going to be doing joint ventures and becoming a chemical company as well. So they're looking at that value chain and not just going, well, we're just going to blast it out of the ground. They're looking at the added value of making it into the carbonate rather than just lithium supply.
I think that's a really great point, especially as we've seen definitely over the last several years how supply chain issues can quickly cause instability. So very good point there. I wonder, so we've gone through gold, we've talked about uranium, we've talked about lithium. Any other sectors that you feel investors should be keeping an eye on right now?
I think again, going back to the fact that we're doing this energy transition, you cannot go past Dr. Copper. You know, there again, these mines, people that don't actually watch this space and don't watch it closely, the majority of the world, are not aware of just how much copper is needed for an electric vehicle, how much copper will be required for all of this transition that we're going through. And that these mines, you don't just turn the copper tap on. These mines take potentially decades to come online. At the moment, we're mining lower and lower grades of copper in the mines that are currently on stream. We've got to really start to look at where do we find new copper. Now, Chile is one area, but there are places here in Australia, in Queensland, we've got some good, potentially some good opportunities for copper. But yeah, I like the copper opportunity. I think Eagle Mountain Mining, which is over there in the US, that's one to watch. But the copper thematic has got to be one to have a look at. But you know me, Charlotte, I'll always go back to gold because to me, gold is money and everything else is credit. So as an investor, I always say physical gold is your friend. That is what will protect your purchasing power. You keep it, you hold it, you don't spend it. That's like it's not savings per se, but if you got into a heck of a lot of trouble, you could then sell that for currency. But from a speculation point of view or investment point of view, gold equities, I think, because no one's looking. Be a contrarian. And Rick Rule always says this. He's always a contrarian investor. When everyone else is looking left, he looks right. So right now, I'm loving gold. No one loves it.
I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, unless you had anything else to add, any events that you are hosting in the future, any final thoughts that we should end on.
Oh, thanks, Charlotte. Well, we've got the Australian Gold Conference. I'd love people from Canada. I'd love to see half the audience be Canadians or from any other part of the world, quite frankly, because Australia does produce a lot of gold. It's where we create our wealth. There's some great opportunities. So the Australian Gold Conference will be in Sydney on the 26th to the 28th of August. That's next year, because we're coming up to the end of 23. So next year, 26th, 28th of August, goldevents.com.au is where you'll find all the information. And yeah, we look forward to that. And I think gold equities will be very, very different in August of next year.
Perfect. And we'll add that link to the video description so people can check it out if they want to. I still haven't made my way over to Australia. Maybe next year. I'm crossing my fingers. We'll see what happens. But thank you so much for coming on to talk about what's going on in the resource sector. Really good to have you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Been great to be here and great to chat.
Of course. And once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and this is Kerry Stevenson. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a comment below. We'll see you next time.